Okay, so for these next couple of examples, remember our steps. We have to make sure that the polynomial is set equal to 0, then we need to factor it, and after we factor it, we set the parentheses or GCF equal to 0 and find our answers for x. So the first one, number 5, it's already set equal to 0, so I don't have to do the first step. Next thing, I have to factor out a GCF. So my GCF here is an x. Actually, it's a 3x. So I can divide these both by 3x. If you still like to use that step, that's fine. Gives me x minus 3 equals 0. So that was my GCF step. This is a binomial, so you might be thinking difference of two squares, but you don't have an x squared here. So since you don't have an x squared here, you can't factor that further. So I'm going to set these equal to 0. 3x is equal to 0. X minus 3 is equal to 0 to find my answers. So divide by 3, x is equal to 0. Add the 3, x is equal to 3. So my two answers are x is equal to 0 and x is equal to 3. I have two answers. Well, that makes sense because my highest exponent is a squared. Looking at number 2. So this is not set equal to 0. So what I'm going to do is, I know you might be tempted to move over the x squared to the other side, but if you do that, you're going to have a negative leading number, and you don't want a negative leading coefficient. So I'm actually going to move all of these terms over to x. So I'm going to add over the 10x squared. I'm going to add over the 10, and I'm going to add over the x. I know it seems like a lot of work, but that way you have a positive leading coefficient. So that is x squared plus 10x plus x plus 10 is equal to 0. Right there, my two terms right here, I can combine them, gives me x squared plus 11x plus 10 is equal to 0. I have a trinomial, so right now my trinomials are add, multiply. So two numbers that multiply to 10 but add to 11. Well, that's 1 and 10. So this factors into x plus 1, x plus 10 is equal to 0. Last step, set these equal to 0. You might actually be able to see that the answers are -1 and -10. If you can, you don't need to show this step. Okay, I'm just going to continue to show it just because of the fact that I don't know what level all of us are at, so I'm just going to keep showing it. But if you want to skip what I have in blue because you know the answer is -1 and -10, that's perfectly fine. And once again, you can write your answers in whatever order you want. I just like to write them in least to greatest. I have two answers. My highest exponent is a square, so that works out. Moving on to our next page. So I'm going to set this equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract over the x squared. Leaves me with x squared. Then I'm going to subtract over the 3x. So that leaves me with a -2x. And then I don't have any like terms here with the 48. So minus 48 is equal to 0. I have a trinomial. There's no GCF. I have a trinomial, so I'm using add, multiply. So I need two numbers that multiply to -48 and add to -2. So those two numbers are going to be -8 and 6. Okay, so this factors into x minus 8, x plus 6. Equals 0. Set these factors equal to 0, but like I said, you don't need to show this step if you know the answer is going to be +8 and if you know the answer is going to be -6. But if you want to keep showing the steps, that's perfectly okay. So my final answer is that my x is equal to -6 and 8. Okay, looking at the next one. So I'm going to move everything over to the x to the third power. That way my leading coefficient can be positive. Okay, that's my goal. I want to stay with the x cubed term. I want to make sure that that stays positive. Okay, so it gives me 0 is equal to 3x cubed minus 6x squared plus 3x. I can hear it right now. Mrs. Paglione, can I write the 0 on the other side? Absolutely. If you don't like the 0 to be out front, which I don't like to either, put it on the right-hand side. That's perfectly fine. Next step, let's factor out a GCF. So there is a GCF here of an x. Actually, of a 3x. It's my second time doing that. Of a 3x. So that leaves me with x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 0. Now it's a trinomial, so I'm going to use add multiply. So I need two numbers that add to -2 and multiply to 1. Well, multiply to 1 is only 1 and 1, but it has to add to a -2, so they both need to be negative. So I'm going to leave my GCF on the outside, then I get x minus 1, x minus 1. If you want to write it as x minus 1 squared, that's fine. Just know that you need to make sure that you have a positive 1 in your answer twice. So speaking of that, I'm going to set these equal to 0. Write that down really quickly. I'm going to get 3 answers, which I think is consistent with my highest exponent, and it is consistent with my highest exponent, so I should have 3 answers. So I get x is equal to 0, x is equal to 1, x is equal to 1. Yes, I do want you to write the double root. Once again, I'll explain to you what a double root is once we get closer towards the end of this virtual learning. But for right now, I want to use it because that allows us to see that I have 3 answers and my highest exponent is cubed. The next view. So the next view is grouping. So what's going to end up happening is I'm going to set these equal to 0 and you're going to have 4 terms. Just like the first one, I have 4 terms. So I'm going to be factoring by grouping with these 4 terms. Group the first 2, group the last 2, pull out a GCF, leaves me with x minus 1, negative 16, x minus 1, it all equals 0. Pull out the common x minus 1, then I'm left with x squared minus 16 equals 0. Okay, so this is all grouping so far. Now I have a difference of squares. There's going to be a lot of dots in these groupings, okay? So there's going to be a lot of dots. So this factors into, this is 4 squared, x plus 4, x minus 4, and then I can bring down the x minus 1. So there's going to be some dots with these, difference of 2 squares. Set all of my factors equal to 0, and you might already be able to see that positive 1 is my first one, negative and positive 4 are my other 2. So I have 3 answers here, which I think relates to, and it does, my highest exponent is a cubed, so I should have 3 answers, and I am going to have 3 answers. Okay, so my answers are going to be that x is equal to -4, 1, and 4, or whatever way you want to write it, whatever order. Looking at the next one, okay, also set equal to 0, so that's kind of nice. They already did that work for us. So I'm going to group and group. Pull out an x squared, leaves me with a 2x plus 7. Pull out a negative 100, leaves me with a 2x plus 7. So I'm going to throw the 0 on the right-hand side. If you want to leave it on the equal 0 on the left-hand side, that's fine. I'm going to get 2x plus 7 as my first set of parentheses, and then my GCFs as my second set of parentheses. Hopefully you've seen that hidden difference of 2 squares, the dots that's right there. This is 10 squared, so x plus 10, x minus 10. And then you bring the 2x plus 7 down because we don't want to forget it. Looks like I'm going to have 3 answers, which is what I should have because my highest exponent is cubed. So I'm going to go through and write down what those 3 answers are. So I showed the work here of finding those 3 answers. So the first one is -7/2. Then I've got a -10 and a 10. So writing in from least to greatest order, it's a -10, -7/2, and a 10. Don't have to write it in that order. Don't even have to write it together. You could write it separately if you'd like. Next one, looks like these are going to be our last 2. So for this one, I do have to set it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract over the 9x squared and move everything to that positive leading coefficient and add over the 9. So that's going to give me x cubed minus 9x squared minus x plus 9 equals 0. Then this is factoring by grouping. So I'm going to go through and group the first two, group the second two. X squared, x minus 9. Leading coefficient is negative, so I'm going to pull out a -1. That makes it x minus 9. So my factoring is x minus 9, x squared minus 1. Hopefully we are seeing our dots there. Woo. Okay, our difference of two squares. So 1 squared is 1. So this is x plus 1, x minus 1, and x minus 9. Set all of these equal to 0. So that's what I've done here. And I know my answer is -1, 1, and 9. I have 3 answers. My highest exponent is a cubed. It all works out. Last one, I've got quite a bit of solving here, so I'm going to move everything to the left-hand side. Yes, I'm going to move it to left-hand side because that way I'm going to be adding over the 4x cubed, and that's my highest exponent, so it's going to be a positive leading coefficient, which is what I want. So that'll cancel. I'm going to add over the 3x squared, which is a combining like terms right here with the 2x squared. So that's a positive x squared. And then I'm going to be subtracting over the 64x. There's no like terms to combine, so that just becomes a minus 64x. And then subtract the 26 gives me a negative 16. So I can combine that with the 10. All right, factoring by grouping, group the first two, group the second two. X squared leaves me with 4x plus 1. I must be able to pull out a 16 here, and I can pull out a negative 16. It'll give me 4x plus 1. So I get 4x plus 1 as my first set of parentheses, and then I have x squared minus 16 as my second set of parentheses. Hopefully we're seeing the difference of two squares that I have here. 4 squared is 16. So this becomes x plus 4, x minus 4. And then you bring down the 4x plus 1. Set it equal to 0. Set all of these parts equal to 0 to get my 3 answers. So I just showed that really quickly right there. Take a moment and review it. But my answer should be x is equal to -4, -1, 4th, and 4. Okay, those are my 3 answers. And once again, that highest exponent that I had was a cube, so it works out. All right, so we are going to meet together in our live Teams chat in just a moment, and I look forward to going through this with you. You do have an IXL, but like I said before, the IXL is going to be on the already factored form. Okay, so more of these types of problems. All right, see you guys soon.